methane river will not let me pass. I cannot cross it, it blocks my path. I cannot make it. I cannot make it.
Bill Fay is a British musician, singer and songwriter. He created two albums in 1970 and 1971, and they didn't sell at all well, so his record label dropped him at that point. This looked like it was probably going to be the end of his career. He did go back into the studio and record another album between 1978 and 1981, but that was not released. However, in 1998, his first two albums were re-released, and he developed a cult following around that time, and so interest in him grew from that point. In 2005, that third album that he'd recorded in the late 70s got itself released, and he's had a resurgence since then. So he's had three more albums released in 2012, 2015, and 2020. Hi, my name is Dan. So this was Bill Fay's first album, and it's my first encounter with him as an artist. So obviously I've not heard the album before. And what I usually do, I've said this loads of times, but I know people dip into these, so I'll explain it again. What I usually do is that I listen to an album once before looking up any information. So this is especially effective with albums where I don't know anything about the album or the act, and then read up on them and listen again. So I have an out-of-context listen and an in-context listen. And on this occasion, I had no clue what I was going to be hearing the first time through. So it was an interesting experience. So I think I need to describe this as, or label it as Baroque pop. Okay. Now, I think I also feel the need to explain that term, or what I think of that term means. So I think it as being pop songs, but not necessarily the same structure as, certainly not as pop these days, but pop from those days, maybe more so. But using an orchestra backing, and this reminds me of people like Andy Williams, Scott Walker, from the British side, Max Bygraves and Des O'Connor from a bit early on, Perry Como, stuff by Neil Diamond, for example. So it's more grandiose than most pop, but it's also the orchestral elements give it this feeling of what I used to call in my youth easy listening. And in fact, there used to be racks in the record shops that were labelled easy listening for this sort of stuff. So there'd be kind of semi-classical arrangements in there as well, and so that describes this predominantly. I would say there are not all tracks have got the orchestral stuff going on, but most of them do. As well as that, then I'd say that there are elements of folk about it, more in terms of subject matter, because there are songs about people. There's a song about a guy who went to war. There's a song previous to that about, which is a speaking song about, give us one of your songs about someone who's gone to war. And there are elements of psychedelia, not really musically, but more, again, thematically, which is, by which I mean stuff that's kind of fantastic, and often psychedelic stuff was not only fantastic, but also quite concerned with kind of nature and the mundane and stuff like that. So there's a song on this album about, in fact, the first song on the album about him planting himself in a garden, and that's very kind of psychedelic kind of idea. There's another song later called Methane River, which is kind of this interesting picture that it's painting. At times, it reminded me quite strongly of Paul McCartney. I feel like there's no doubt that he'd been under the influence of the Beatles as he recorded this album. Some of his phrasing and pronunciation just seems to be mimicking the Beatles at times. Also, it reminded me of Neil Diamond, particularly Sweet Caroline's the song Sweet Caroline. Um, to, to my mind, the orchestral stuff here is overdone. And I don't really know where that choice had come from. I think that this might well be part of why. I mean, I don't know what the second album was like, but partly why this album didn't sell is because at this point in time there were so many other things that were in this kind of sound, um, but lyrically it's not. It doesn't quite fit. It's not quite the same. So I think that that might have contributed to its failure at that point, and I wonder if this would have done better if they'd had simpler arrangements and focused on him. And I think piano's his main instrument, um, so it made it feel more like a Carole King kind of approach. Otherwise, I think his singing's reasonably good. The songwriting is pretty good, pretty solid. I think it's quite deftly done in some ways, apart from the orchestral arrangements, which, yeah, they're fine as orchestral arrangements go, but I just didn't. I think it was a mismatch here, and I feel like that was a bad choice to go orchestral. So that's what I think of this album. Please let me know what you think by typing something relevant into the comments underneath the video. And that's it from me for now.
I'm planting myself in the garden. Believe me, between the potatoes and parsley,